Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Videonet webcast, where today we're talking about how we engage and monetize digital-first consumers. The term digital-first really comes out of the advertising and marketing world, and it relates to campaigns where people are prioritizing digital as their way to reach a certain audience because they're in the digital world. And more recently, we've heard broadcasters using the term to talk about how they're reaching out to younger viewers, whether it's through multi-channel networks or YouTube syndication or short-form content. Today we're using the term to describe a mindset, really. So a digital-first viewer is someone who may still be watching linear TV, but they love online media and they actually prefer to get their entertainment online. They could be millennials, they could be Generation Z who are following on behind the millennials, but they could be any age really, because it's not actually a demographic, it's just a sort of a state of mind. So during the next hour we're going to talk about how a media company can build a digital service that really appeals to that kind of viewer. And we'll be talking about personalization, really digging into the next steps in terms of personalized TV services. We'll be looking at how we can build a greater understanding of the overall context in which people view their media throughout the day. And we'll be looking at how you can harness data that comes from being closer to consumers and use that to improve the business and the service, whether it's advertising or even in terms of content acquisition. So we've got four great speakers today, and I'll introduce them in a minute. But because we're live, you can ask questions. So if you look on your console, there's a Q&A square there, and if you type into the second white box, you can just submit a question to us, and we'll stop at various points during the hour to take audience questions. So let me introduce the speakers then. I'm delighted to welcome David Amodio, who's the Digital and Creative Leader at Channel 4. We also have Miles Weaver, who is Innovation Lead at Piksel. I'm joined by David Mercer, VP and Principal Analyst at Strategy Analytics. And we're also joined by Neil Berry, who is the Executive Vice President Commercial at Piksel. So welcome to all of you gentlemen. The first question then is to you, David Mercer. I mean, we hear this term personalized TV. I mean, for a digitally minded consumer, what are they looking for in terms of personalization? And then if you do meet those expectations, are they actually going to spend more time with your brand?
Yes, hi everybody. I mean, the term digital first in the context of television and video is quite interesting, and I mean, there's obviously no question that the move towards digital and online is well underway across the market. I mean, what we find from our research, in fact, that the subtleties of the behaviours of different segments around consumption of digital video or online video are actually quite different. And I think one of the challenges for broadcasters and content players generally is understanding those different behaviours and targeting their content and related advertising appropriately, and as you say, personalizing it to those different types of groups. So believe it or not, there is still a segment out there that hasn't started any sort of digital activity, and that's about a third of the audience still. So that's one new segment that potentially could be targeted in the future. The rest of the audience can be segmented into multi-screeners, people who really are very heavily engaged in all kinds of digital activity. And then you've got sort of specialist groups. The one I think is most interesting is what we call the TV OTTers or TV otters, who are in many ways at the vanguard of the drive towards online video, very interested in, as you say, going digital for consuming television. So I think, as I say, very important to understand these different types of behaviour, and how you approach personalisation, depends very much on the interests of those different groups. But I mean, generally, the answer to the question is clearly yes. If you can develop, strategies targeted to those groups, they will certainly be more likely to engage with your particular brand.
Okay, and David Amodio, I mean, on all four, you have recommendations, email reminders, favourites. I mean, there's various sort of features there that are personalised. I mean, what do you think are the most important things that you can do on a service to personalise it?
I mean, you've mentioned a couple of them. I think there's a number of things you can do. So we're doing some quite clever stuff around things like favourites and reminders. which of course you can only do if you know who your viewers are and you've got that one-on-one relationship with them. So on our offering, every logged-in viewer now has something called My4, which is the bespoke section that they can click on favourites to make sure that every time they open up the app, then that favourite show is then prompted to them. But probably the most important thing we're doing that's on a decent sort of scale is what we're doing around recommendations. So when you go into the All4, which is our digital service interface, there are 5 panels prompting different pieces of content in there. So the first 4 of those panels, every single viewer has exactly the same recommendation from us at Channel 4, but the 5th panel is actually prompted by your previous viewing habits. So I think that's where we're finding that lots more people are actually watching stuff that we're suggesting they watch based on their previous habits. And I think having that level of personalisation that's perhaps unprompted is probably the most effective way of getting people to watch your content. It's kind of the Netflix model, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that's the right balance, having 4 recommended by you as in a sort of an editorial curation function and 1 by them, and do you think that would change over time?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, it's we're doing lots of multivariate testing at the moment, but at the moment, I think to have sort of 20% that's based on previous viewing feels about right. I think it probably will start shifting slightly towards having more than that in the future. But as I say, if you click into the My4 section, then that's entirely driven by your viewing. So what you'll tend to get is those that are more au fait with that level of personalisation will almost become their own editor of choice. But I still think there's a really strong and important job for the broadcaster to surface other content that isn't necessarily based on previous viewing as well. So I think there's still a role for us to be the editor of choice as well as the viewer.
Yeah, I mean, with all 4, how much would you say that service relies on knowing who is actually watching as an individual?
I mean, I think from a sort of viewer relationship management point of view, it's really important that we have a one-on-one conversation with our viewers now. And you've mentioned some of the ways we're doing it. I mean, we do this with a welcome email the minute someone registers and gives us their details and accesses our content. We do it through things I've already talked about, such as reminders, and also things like incomplete VOD views. So if someone's watching a piece of content and doesn't finish watching it, then the next time they log in, we know that, and we can then prompt them to finish that. So that it might be because they've been disturbed or whatever, and they've not been able to finish watching that piece of competition. And then I think there's lots of other nice kind of softer things you can do as well with having that one-on-one relationship. Things like competitions and another really quite clever thing that we've found works really well is actually premiering exclusive content to viewers before it actually goes out on the linear feed. So we've seen quite good results around a lot of our youth shows. So if you think of quite sort of fan-based shows, this tends to be quite a powerful way of getting people to talk about those shows and creating buzz and getting them to share stuff on social media, and it makes them feel a little bit special because they're seeing that content before everybody else is seeing that content. So in that sense, I think it's that's a really important part of having that relationship, is being able to do those special things with your viewers and make them feel like they're really locked into your service.
Yeah, and those exclusives are available only if you're logged in customer, presumably.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we only, I mean, we moved more and more behind registration as audiences became more comfortable. So initially, we'd only kind of put new series in there, but now we've moved our entire .com and mobile on-demand service behind registration rules. But yeah, getting more and more registered users, that's quite a useful tool to do it. So, but giving them exclusive content really helps.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll talk about your database later because it's quite impressive. But in the meantime, Neil, you sort of think that we can go beyond knowing who the user is and start looking at not just the device they're on, but also where they're watching. So it's more about the sort of wider context. I mean, what is the value of that?
Yeah, I think that's critically important. We believe that it's fundamental to provide a world-class online video experience, making sure that you've got the consumer insights around what we call context, And we feel that the context is just as key as content itself. People say content is king, so content is obviously queen. So understanding the context is not only about the device, but things like time of day, location, device type, and actually previous behavior. So combining that data can actually be very, very powerful. So if you combine all these things, it means we can deliver content that's relevant to the user at the right time that they're looking for it. And content needs to change depending on if they're using a mobile or a smart TV, whether they're home or on the train, whether it's 9 a.m. in the morning or 9 p.m. in the evening. So knowing this alongside their previous behavior and the content that they look for at these different times in different places on different devices means we can deliver a service that can give them what they want when they want it, making it far easy for them to discover new content. So kind of understanding how consumers are using these different devices and this context in an average day or an average week around your content can be hugely valuable. So making sure you understand this content can perhaps, as an example, enable you to create a moment of truth. So if I'm a user that always uses my mobile phone to watch 15 minutes of Game of Thrones on the train on the way home, when they get home, then obviously in their lean back experience, if you can tee up the rest of the episode for them so that they don't go and have to search for it, that can create a much more sticky service and creates a more addictive user experience using those rich insights that typically are not serviced up or previously insights that people are not merging together. In terms of value, I think research that we see suggests that 74% of users of these services get frustrated if content appears that has nothing to do with their interests. So then they could presumably switch over or use other social media to engage their time. So when context is used to personalize the experience, and a prime example of that is like content recommendation, then the value can be huge. We've seen across some of our customers an average uplift of 40% in dwell time or engagement. If people watch for longer, if you're in an ad-funded environment, from a monetization perspective, that means you can serve more ads. If you're in a sales environment, we've seen uplift in 19% around sales conversions if you're using interactive video and call to action. So personalizing and using context as well as mixed in with the content is really key and really valuable.
Okay, so sort of lining up the right kind of content when you get home because maybe somebody's hasn't finished a show on the train, maybe. I mean, and David earlier mentioned VOD that may not be finished. I mean, are these they sound fairly simple, but they can have a significant impact?
Yeah, absolutely they can. And if you think about it, you don't really want to create an experience where your customer, you've already demonstrated on different devices at different points in time what kind of service you want. If you can't surface up and they have to spend ages looking for the content, trying to discover the content, and you don't have a kind of cross-device, cross-platform view of the world, then actually that creates a user experience that actually could cause customer churn. So I think, there's a lot of that data is already there today. It's just found in different places across different platforms, and you need to be able to merge it together. Typically today it's in silos.
Yeah,
sorry to interrupt, but just to add to that, to Neil's point, I think a lot of this is about keeping your viewers within your environment for longer as well, and that's where having data on them and being able to suggest things is really helpful, because we're all inherently busy and inherently lazy. So things like a watch next function is really useful at doing that. So usually you'll just always watch the next episode, but if you're coming to an end of a series, then if you can suggest to viewers something that's very relevant based on their previous viewing, then they're much more likely to stay with you rather than come out of your environment and go elsewhere. So I think that's a really important part as well, is just keeping them there longer.
Yeah, I mean, Neil, what you just talked about, in terms of trains and then sort of transferring that knowledge into the set-top box at home, I mean, that has to be joined up. I mean, is all this information or data available right now to sort of do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, a lot of the information is available. I certainly think it's been today captured in different areas, particularly when you think about, linear, VOD, catch-up, TV everywhere, online. Data's being captured in all these different places. The real challenge is being able to join all that data up and actually surface up, if you like, a story around an average day of a user experience and being able to capitalize on that data in one place and knowing that behavior. And again, capitalizing, using that data with the other personalized data that you've got. I mean, personalized marketing now is happening as a tsunami in the industry and changing the way that we look at marketing campaigns. I guess there's some cautionary note that whilst the data exists and we know all this data, surfacing up is a challenge that we've seen, but also there's some nervousness, and all of us have probably seen the film Minority Report, which paints a kind of bit of an overwhelming picture where all advertising is personally tailored and directed at you as an individual, and we've already begun to see some backlashes where marketeers are pushing it a little bit too far by perhaps including your name or referencing data that you might be uncomfortable with a brand knowing, but we still may be able to personalize that to target, people that are called John that have a birthday that recently launched at, say, a sports event, but the creative that we use to do so needs to tread a bit of a thin line of what's being relevant and personalized without being invasive.
Okay. Now, Miles, you've got some slides which kind of show the sort of trend towards digital-first culture. So why don't you talk us through those? I'll just put the first one up now.
Sure. So on this, and I'm going to go through these as a sort of a group, and then I'll sort of summarize because they're all talking to the same point. So this first one shows that we've seen a 6% drop in cable subscriptions among viewers under 35. If we move on to the next slide, we see that we're seeing a 20% jump in pay TV subscribers. Age between, I'm just waiting for the slide to load up, but I think it's age between 18 and 35, 25 and 34, sorry, that also have Netflix accounts. So there's a 20% jump in pay TV subscribers that are also subscribing to an on-demand platform there. And then finally on the third slide, we've seen a 39% increase in Netflix subscribers amongst 50 to 59-year-olds. So we're seeing essentially millennial cable subscriptions falling, pay TV subscriptions amongst that, more or less that same group, are being burnished with sort of on-demand subscriptions as well. And then we're also seeing, I suppose, the group that we would traditionally sort of call the tech Luddites of 50 to 59-year-olds who have not always been on board with this internet and this digital thing. They are getting on board that bandwagon in a big way now with Netflix. So in short, we're seeing users of all ages, not just millennials now, embracing digital viewing in a big way. And this is not the flash in the pan or the momentary tech trend that it's occasionally been dismissed as by some traditional broadcast minds. This is a change in cultural behavior that is accelerating. There are so many advantages to digital viewing outside of simply watching what I want when I want. That we've mentioned some of them already, and we'll explore some of them further. But things like discovery, personalization, content and advertising targeting, as well as simple convenience, all these kind of things lead to the trend that these slides are speaking to and these statistics are speaking to, that we as a global culture, not just where it's previously always been the dominion of the sort of Western first world nations, but as a truly global movement now, we are all moving further and further towards digital first viewing. And the question that we as service providers and content owners and whatnot need to ask ourselves is how we keep up with that shift, how we engage those users, be it through things like facilitating better discovery, targeting the right kinds of ads for the right kind of person at the right kind of moment, or the myriad benefits of personalization. These are all things we need now to start to consider.
Okay, just very quickly, I mean, in terms of the UI, the user interface or the wider user experience, when it comes to personalization and customization, I mean, which sort of features do you think will have the greatest impact for consumers or for the media business itself?
Well, I think there's a difference certainly between personalization and customization. When I hear customization, I think it's a grayer area, as that to me speaks very much to giving power to the user and to a certain extent to customize the UI. And where you're going there, it very much depends on the demographic base and the kinds of devices and behavioral habits that they have. Younger users, for example, will probably put mobile customization as a priority over desktop customization. But If we think about personalization, certainly, I think, again, it all comes down to content. And I think you need to think of the content and how we can make the user journeys to content shorter and, where possible, more enjoyable. If I can get to the content that I want in 2 clicks rather than 3 or 4, so much better. So we need to get the content that will interest the user, not just necessarily what they know they want, but an important part of personalizing the service is delivering an effective discovery experience. We need to get that to them in a fashion that will work for them. The right content shown in the right user interface for the right device, shortening those user journeys and making a more enjoyable all-round experience that will in turn create stickiness in the service, which will benefit the business all the more because users will want to stay within that experience and will want to give their time to that experience.
Okay, and that vision that Neil outlined of the sort of the increased understanding of context for viewers right through their day. I mean, what are the benefits to the viewers for that?
So I think if a media company knows what we as users do in our daily lives, they should aim to deliver the content that's of interest to us at a time when it matters, because they know we're giving them that information, what it is that we're doing at the time. And it's not enough to simply have knowledge of that, or simply to have knowledge that, my data is of value to you. You need to do something valuable to me. You need to do something valuable with that information. So an increasing number of users are accepting that they need to share their data with services, but they do that with the justified expectation that said services will put that data to good use. We're now at a level where a media company, a service provider, a content owner can begin to accompany us throughout our daily lives, even in our pocket on a mobile device or even on a smartwatch. But they need to show that they are going to be a useful part of that experience. It goes beyond simply saying, hello, Miles, when I sign into the service. It needs to affect the content that I'm recommended. It needs to touch upon the user interface that I see depending on the device I'm using. It needs to touch on the advertisements that I see. If I'm giving you my data and knowing that you're going to make more money off that, in exchange for that little transaction there, I need to see, as a user, some actual benefit as well.
Sure. Okay, well, let's take an audience question now. We've got Andrew Bonner. I'll address this to you, David Amodio. I think you're probably best placed to answer it. Andrew Bonner, he's Ad Tech Director at Discovery, and he's asking, in scheduled TV airtime systems, we have a lot of control over ad placements, clashes and targeting restrictions, etc. What are you doing to get the same degree of placement control on ads for non-scheduled TV?
It's a good question. I mean, we're trying at the moment. I think we're looking at the model, and we're almost trying not to fall into some of the same traps that we fell into when TV first got set up. So I think some of the things that we enable clients and agencies to do, we perhaps shouldn't have allowed them some time ago. So yes, maybe it's important to not have car ads back to back, but excluding them from exactly the same ad break is probably not the most efficient way to move forward. So we're actually trying to almost start with a bit of a level playing field again, and not necessarily just trying to replicate exactly what's going on in the TV space. But I mean, the ad servers we're using are sophisticated and can manage all those sort of things. But it's actually giving us the opportunity to almost take a step back and say, actually, do we need to move in exactly the same way and have the same sort of straitjacket put on us that we've had in the past? And do consumers really, care if there's a car at the beginning of the ad and a car at the end of the ad? Does that really kind of have a massive impact? And we're not so sure. And until there's some hard metrics in place and some research that can prove, then I think it's something that is there to be debated.
Okay. All right. Well, David Mercer, let's talk about content monetization in a bit more detail. I mean, you did some research, your company did some research at the end of last year on OTT revenues, and it kind of concluded that OTT video was just hitting its stride in terms of consumption and monetization. So, I mean, how are media companies beginning to monetize their digital platforms more effectively?
Well, I think what we've seen in the last few years, and it's ramping up obviously very quickly now, is is the drive towards subscription models, and in many ways it shows that OTT video, OTT TV is in fact beginning to look an awful lot like the traditional world of television. If you look at the mix of revenues on a global basis now in OTT, subscription the share of subscription model has increased quite significantly. Advertising, of course, is still an important chunk, and the share of what I call the pay-as-you-go models, sort of rental and sell-through, has been in decline. So that's the sort of general big picture. And in terms of our forecast, in actual fact, we're seeing a slight increase in the share of advertising over the next few years, but subscription will remain a very important revenue stream. And as I say, this I think reflects the fact that the content players and the industry generally is very comfortable with the model that television has established over the last several decades. And it's something that consumers are familiar with as well. And we've always said that the subscription model is something that most segments of the audience are happy to accept once they recognise the value in the product. They would rather pay a sort of a fixed monthly fee or sometimes an annual fee, and know for sure that that's what they're going to be paying, and not have the uncertainty of different levels of payment from one month to another. So I think this is in many ways the maturation of the OTT business, and I think we're beginning to see how the long-term revenue picture is likely to look.
Okay, and I mean, if you can get digital-first consumers watching more of your content, and we suggested earlier that you can, I mean, what is the impact on the business? Is it is it just about subs? Is it about more advertised inventory?
Yeah, and I think that question obviously depends very much on the business model of the individual player concerned, the content player or the service provider. And of course, there's a big debate right now. Everybody's looking at the new £800 gorilla, Netflix, driving forward without generating advertising revenue. And I think a lot of people are saying, or questioning at least, how long that can continue. Netflix obviously at the moment very happy with their strategy. We'll see whether that does change over time. But clearly, if you are purely in the subscription model, I think your approach towards customer needs and satisfying customers is perhaps a little bit different. And it's no surprise, it's not news to say that content exclusivity is one of the key parts of that type of approach. Putting content out there which is not available anywhere else is a very good way of attracting customers and, of course, maintaining satisfaction with your existing customer base. And of course, like a lot of pay TV companies, Netflix would say that viewing figures, in a way, are not a critical part of their business model. They would say that publicly. They don't care too much about whether any particular show reaches a certain level of audience. Of course, that's very different if you are trying to generate advertising revenues. So I think that's obviously the first divide you have to look at. If you're in the ads business, as many OTT players are, I think we're still learning, to be honest with you, and this is something that I think as the worlds of OTT and the traditional television worlds learn more from each other, I think we'll see a lot of experimentation and different approaches towards delivering ads, the volume of ads, the timing, and of course we've already heard a lot about the personalization approach. And I mean, one of our messages has always been that what OTT should offer is an improvement in the effectiveness of advertising overall. We've seen some signs of that happening, but I think there's plenty more opportunity down the road there in terms of improving the value of advertising and ultimately its ability to drive revenues from viewers.
Okay, and David Amodio, I mean, you've got great reach into youngsters with Channel 4 and obviously all 4 people who love online. You've got half of the 16 to 34-year-old age group in the UK registered for the service. I mean, are you reaping the rewards from advertisers for that? Because, we hear that advertisers are finding it harder to reach that kind of demographic elsewhere.
Yeah, I think they are. I think it's fair to say that young people have changed their use of media significantly since the advance of the web. I mean, total time spent with media of the younger generation is actually higher than ever, because a lot of it is taking place at different times of the day and on different devices, mainly due to mobile devices. But yeah, digital's kind of rightly flourishing as a result of that, at the to the detriment of traditional media. I think it's mainly hit press ahead of TV, if I'm honest, so far. But it is starting to obviously cannibalise the traditional TV viewing of youngsters, and we're as one of the younger skewing broadcasters, we're probably benefiting from that. But yeah, I think the other thing to sort of talk about that's really important in terms of targeting younger viewers is fragmentation, which is bad news for advertisers overall, because that the best job that TV does is obviously the ability to reach en masse. And I think years ago all you had to do was make fantastic content, and people, whether they were young or old, would find it. And I think now that the kind of task that we as broadcasters have is that you've got to make really, really good content, but then you've got to work really, really hard to bring it to the surface and get through all the clutter. And I think that having a more one-on-one relationship with your viewers and being clever about how you're doing that is really important. Having that, I think Miles mentioned that value exchange. Youngsters now are much more used to having ad-free environments with the likes of Netflix and ad skipping, brought in by Google and YouTube. So the more personalised and relevant and rewarding you can make your ad environment, then the better for this demographic, and the more they're going to stay with your content. So I think it's more important than ever. I think we as a broadcaster in the UK are probably, it's fair to say, leading the way in this area, but we're still learning as we go along, and it's exciting and a little bit scary as well. So so it's a long-winded way of saying yes, we're reaping the rewards, but we are also staying awake at night, quite scared of the big bad Netflix coming over the horizon. And personal point of view, I think they will introduce ads at some point in a very different format, but I don't think it will be too long before they at least have sponsors of shows that aren't too intrusive. So I think that's when they do start really eating our lunch on the commercial side as well as on the editorial side.
Okay. Well, that was one of the audience questions we had actually from Ned Wiley, and that was, does the rise of OTT subscription models mean the end of ads? He's asking, does it mean the end of ad-supported models? So I'll ask that one to David Mercer quickly, and then we'll carry on with the debate. But David, do you think the rise of OTT subscription models means the end of ad-supported? I mean, it sounds like the opposite way around, in fact, judging by what David just said.
Yes, and I think, as I mentioned in my comments just now, in terms of our forecast of the revenue models, there's a nice balance there between advertising and subscription. Look, advertisers are always being threatened by this, that, or the other new technology, and somehow they manage to, continue to get their message across, and I have no doubt they'll continue to in the world of OTT video.
Okay, and David Amodio, before I interrupted there, just very quickly, tell us about short form, because you made a big investment in that last year with original series. I mean, is that just a good example of new and additive content that brings in, branding opportunities and sponsorship that you just didn't have before?
Yeah, I mean, we invested quite heavily in shorts, as you say. I mean, we've seen growth in our mobile platforms really sort of peak over the last couple of years. So that's what sort of drove us to make more short form, sort of snackable, bite-sized content. And we're finding, we think, I mean, this is none of this is categorically proved scientifically, but we think it's additive. It's being watched in and around our long form viewing, sort of as a sort of time filler, but we are seeing some evidence of other parts of the day spiking as well. So we're seeing quite a lot of it consumed around the sort of daytime when people have probably got less time on their hands to watch content. So in that sense, I think there's probably some evidence to show that it's definitely worth the investment because it's additive rather than cannibalising. We're also sort of seeing other spikes late at night as well. So people are probably watching it in bed rather than sort of reading a book, or maybe it's cannibalising what they would be doing on TV. But yeah, we're certainly seeing a good, strong young audience who are lapping up a lot of our short form content, and advertisers are really liking some of the opportunities that we've got there to actually do branded content as well. So I think it's a nice testing ground for advertisers as well.
Yeah, okay, well, I like the idea of cannibalising books. So that's a good one. We all like that. Okay, now David Mercer, we hear about these wonderful data-driven insights that we can get. Do you think they're just limited to the digital domain, or can content owners also find these in the sort of the traditional linear world, in the set-top boxes?
Yes, well, I think as already been mentioned, the world of digital TV has had the potential for targeted advertising for many years, and in fact, the set-top box technology that Sky's using, which they pulled together under the AdSmart initiative now, of course, is one of the leading examples around the world of data-based marketing using, as you say, a traditional platform. In fact, really, the technology underlying that goes back quite some years. So TV, won't get left behind, and as we get convergence and the integration of sort of OTT capabilities into the linear world, then the opportunity is there to improve the capabilities of primarily linear systems. I think the point I'd make, in a lot of discussion about personalization, data-based approaches. I think we need to be very wary of some of the attitudes towards data privacy, confidentiality in many parts of the world. And if you have this type of discussion in some parts of Europe, and Germany comes to mind immediately as a country which is particularly cautious towards this type of capability. And as soon as you have these conversations, warnings are sounded that there are very many restrictions on what commercial organisations can do in terms of using and accessing and storing this type of information. So I think just to put that out there as one of the obstacles that players will face in some parts of the world. And the other issue that we've seen in the set-top box environment is really this question of ownership and ultimately who has control over all of this data that's being collected. And we've already talked about the broadcasters, the content owners, the platform owners themselves. And I think this is one of the big questions that's out there right now. Can you get what level of cooperation can you get? Is this going to end up as being commercial agreements, between these various players? Because whoever has access and control over that data clearly has a lot of power and influence over the market.
Yeah, I mean, Miles, wherever this data is coming from, how, as a content owner, can you use it to encourage even more consumption? I mean, can we encourage binge viewing, for example, with the data?
Absolutely, we can. I think, and imagine I'm the content owner. I have a huge library of content at my fingertips that you, the user, will maybe only ever see a few % of. But if I know what you like, if I can get the content from my library that you might never find but are pretty sure to like in front of you, I can structure promotions around your viewing habits. I can encourage you to binge watch new content or content that you're already a fan of when I know that you're most likely to have the most time to view it. Once I understand your behavior, I then have a very powerful set of tools at my disposal in terms of promoting content, in terms of gamifying the viewing experience, in terms of offering incentives to watch, that can keep you engaged in my experience and keep you delving deeper and deeper into my content library.
Okay, and just very quickly, I mean, can you uncover hidden gems? I mean, will you find things maybe that we didn't know were valuable in a catalogue, but turn out they are?
Absolutely, you can, and sort of as I just mentioned, there's a huge potential there. The user is sharing all of their interaction and viewing data with you for start off, and potentially more concrete information when they like or when they favorite or when they rate items as well. As David said earlier, with regards to having users favorite and like items in all four, that gives them a much more sort of concrete picture of specifically what the user likes because they're telling you what they like. The issue that the user has, though, of course, and the issue that discovery from data is so important, is that they will never have enough time, and they may never have enough interest to trawl through your entire back catalog to find those hidden gems. We call them hidden for a reason. Using data, though, we as service providers and content owners can get those gems in front of the user without them needing to trawl for them. This, in turn, allows us to monetize content today in a way that we never could back in the TV or the VHS or the DVD-only eras. Rather than having digital copies just sitting on a digital shelf in the back room somewhere, we can now get them out in front of users that will engage with them, hopefully evangelize them on social media and to their friends, and then give them a new lease of life, while in turn we can push advertisements, we can push new deals and new promotions around that content onto what would have once been just forgotten and hidden, sat in the back.
Okay, and Neil, what about content commissioning? I mean, is there an impact in terms of the data on, how you commission content?
Yeah, absolutely. As Miles just said, I mean, if you're using a kind of an analytical approach to have a conversation with your data to surface up and recommend right content to your audience, it's equally critical to use that same kind of audience science, as I call it, and how do we get into the hearts and minds of that audience to decide what your commissioning strategy should be. And I think we're seeing more and more companies use strategically their analytical data that they have around their audience to actually acquire new content or surface the right content, as Miles explained, to the customer, and also flexing their business models around what they do around certain genres or actors. It's happening a lot on the multi-channel networks on YouTube, for instance, really understanding and using the audience science to understand what content is more trending and more popular than others, and we all get influenced by that. But more and more content owners are using that audience science more strategically for content commissioning, and it's certainly happening already. So we're seeing many customers perhaps looking at snacking content and chunking up episodes of commissioned content so that people consume them in a mobile experience that we kind of referenced and talked about earlier, which they may want to consume while they're commuting or in shorter episodes. And that's based on the fact that we use the data to understand people's viewing habits within that service, and then also using it to understand and make decisions around should we want to provide our audience the ability to watch the whole series rather than it's actually changing people's schedules. So rather than doing it what the TV dictates today, the schedule, is provide a brand new series either in chunked up pieces or to an audience to binge watch the whole series should they do that. So strategic business decisions around content are being based, are now increasingly becoming based around intelligent data and not left to kind of guesstimates. And I guess having an understanding of your audience science is definitely going to enable you to optimize the right content bundle and identify the best feature sets and feature content that you can provide to your consumers.
Okay, and just in 30 seconds, can it determine the value that you place on, content in terms of negotiations? Will it help you in content negotiations?
Definitely. I think being able to analyze price sensitivity, you can decide on the right mix of content, what's popular, what isn't, and go back to your content acquisition and have all the data to present to them to actually more effectively negotiate what the right optimum price is for that content. So, given that you've got all of that audience data, are people more open to ad-free content, what demographic they are, what trade-offs do they make when they're consuming your content, and how are they searching your content? All of that information and insights is absolutely critical to understanding how that can put you in a more better negotiating position to offer content that's relevant, personalized, and more competitive.
Okay, two quick questions to you, David and Amodio, one from me and then one from the audience. From me, how do you judge if you're doing a good job in terms of how you use your data to improve the business? I mean, are there some obvious benchmarks?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's really hard to, categorically say that this is X has had Y result, but we are putting, and we don't really know 100%, but we are putting some multivariate testing in place that basically test the viewing consumption across personalisation pushes versus the broader pushes. So we should hopefully have some results back from that. But that's one way of doing it. So basically, remember I mentioned those tiles. So you could basically move that tile around. You could maybe make that tile not be personalised to one audience and just be a normal broad push, and then you could personalise it to another audience, and then you could test the uplifts on those. That's one way of testing it. And then there are some other quite hard KPIs you can put in place, which are things like your unique registered users. So watching these grow over time is obviously really important. We've got 12 million registered users now, so that's obviously a great benchmark. You can look at your monthly active users as well, opt-in rates, and then you can also look at the level of engagement rates with some of those levers that you can pull, things like Premiere. So are you seeing more and more people want to watch content before it goes on the linear platforms? And I think that's where you start to really understand that actually people are really liking and valuing this level of exclusive content. And like I said earlier, we've for our youth shows on our youth formats, we find this is really lapped up by audiences. So there's definitely an appetite for it.
Right, now I'm going to ask you that audience question in a minute, actually, because before that I'll just ask Miles a quick question. When we're talking about sort of digital-first viewers, do we need to sort of adjust the way we judge success of programs? Because we're used to sort of broadcast ratings, obviously. I mean, is it more to do with social acclaim and engagement now as well as on-demand views? I mean, what are the metrics that matter in this kind of world?
Well, I think we're in a strange place right now when it comes to measuring success, really. If you look at a show like Hannibal, which has regrettably just been cancelled by NBC, that did pretty terrible ratings from the first episode of the first season, but it had an overwhelming critical and audience response and very strong on-demand viewing numbers. These factors, alongside relatively low production costs, allowed a show that was being broadcast in prime time that was doing pretty poor ratings at broadcast time. It allowed it to survive for 3 full seasons. The number a show is pulling on broadcast is, it's still an incredibly important thing because that's where a sizable chunk of the audience are, and that is where the bulk of the advertising money is still being spent. But collectively, I think we're all trying to determine how much on-demand viewing, how much audience and critical praise, and how much social engagement contribute to what we deem to be success. We're not actually sure at the moment what the mix of that metric is, but we know it is no longer just the rating the show has grabbed when it was broadcast on television.
Okay, now David Amodio, the audience question is a lead into talking about programmatic, because it's actually about will programmatic ever be used for television, by which I assume, it's Alessandro Scurati who's asked it. I assume he means sort of linear TV. Now you're using it obviously for all 4. So I mean, do you think, before we talk about all 4, do you think it will go on to normal TV as well?
This is a $10 million question that we keep being asked. But yeah, I mean, we've got a view on this. We believe that there's 2 ways that programmatic could work on the linear feed, and I'm not saying this will happen anytime soon, but the first way is the Sky AdSmart way, where the piece of technology, the set-top box, holds all the assets and then delivers those assets based on who's watching. So that's one way. The big problem with that is you're reliant on every single piece of kit, piece of technology and set-top box all advancing at the same rate. So I think that's always going to be difficult, and Sky spent an awful lot of money and it took an awful lot of time to launch AdSmart, and it's probably fair to say, and I think if you ask them the same question they'll give you the same answer, it's moved slower than perhaps they'd have liked. So that's one way that you could buy programmatically through a linear feed. The other way that we believe programmatic could be bought on linear, you could question whether it is truly programmatic or not, and that's by simply making the decision making take place in real time, much closer to transmission. So at the moment in the UK market, we've got a system called Carrier, which basically enables all of the buying to take place, and it's based on predictions on view made about 5 to 6 weeks in advance of that transmission. So you haven't, you're not using a lot of your actual data, such as VOD data and such as the previous episodes of those programs. So we think there's a possibility to push that decision making nearer to transmission, but still that would mean basically delivering the same piece of copy to a mass audience rather than individual copy to individuals. But it's programmatic in the sense that you're using data and you're automating, and you could approve and book lots of multiple bookings all at once and across multiple channel sets. So that's our kind of thinking at the moment. But things change very quickly, so who knows? Okay.
Now for the online programmatic. Obviously you're using first-party data as part of that. I mean, how did you get 12 million people to sign up and give you, demographic information, personal information?
So we did it quite gradually. We incentivised essentially by giving them chunks of content that were exclusive. So things like premieres. So we'd make sure we did it on quite big shows that we knew had big fan bases, and we'd say, watch this piece of content now before anywhere else. And the other thing that we did was we made sure that if we were launching a new platform, we'd put that behind a registration wall. So when we launched Download, for example, you couldn't download any content unless you registered and gave your details. And what we found is as people became more comfortable with doing that, you can then gradually start to put more and more behind a registration wall. So it's not as big a thing for consumers to do as I think we first perceived. But I think it is important to just gently ease them in, which is the way we do it. So yeah, simple answer: rewards of content is probably the key, and access to new platforms.
Okay. Now at the end, if we get time, I'm just going to come back and ask you about your individual Coke and Burberry campaigns. But just first, Miles, you've got a couple of slides that really show where money is being spent right now and where time's being spent. I've just put the first one on for the audience to see now. Can you just talk us through these quickly?
Yeah, sure. So in this first slide, we see that cumulatively more time is now being spent watching digital content, but vastly more money is being spent on TV advertising. Why is that? I don't have the answer to that question, but the trend of viewing is already in digital's favor, but large sections of the broadcast industry still seem to view it as an also-ran rather than the place that people are going to find more and more content. On the next slide, we see that ad spending will not prioritize digital until 2017. Despite the fact that already digital is the majority of the majority viewing share of people's viewing behavior, and by 2017, or hell, by even 2016, you'll see digital viewing playing a far greater part of the viewing lives of most people. It will have a far bigger part of their lives than traditional broadcast will be.
Okay, now if we go back to that vision of the consumer, and we know everything they're doing 24/7, we've got this wider context. What does that mean for advertising? Is that all about location-aware advertising and relevance at that point?
So I think things like location-aware is an excellent example of how we can use data to better surface advertising content that matters to me, the user, at any given point in time. There's location-aware, there is time-aware advertising that might deploy an ad or a promotion at a given point in time and is available then for a set period of time. And this time will be when the data shows and my behavior shows that I'm proven to be most engaged with the service. We also have device-targeted advertising. If I'm watching on a mobile, then essentially the promotion can come with me on the device. They can't if I'm watching on a TV or a desktop. I'm not going to drag my TV down to Starbucks so I can show them the QR code to get 20% off coffee. So there are various different methods that we can use data to now better target advertisements. And I think we need to be aware of the mood of the moment. We could never have surfaced ads like this even 5 years ago. Smart mobile devices and tablet devices were not this ubiquitous. They are now everywhere, and practically every demographic is using them and is comfortable with using them. And we can just leverage advertising opportunities in a way that we never could before. No one pays attention to the billboard on the side of the road. But if you put that same ad, if you put that billboard in the hand of someone that we know will engage with that brand at a time when they know they will most likely be receptive to it, if you put that on their mobile device, well, then not only is it good for the advertiser, not only is it good for the service provider, as that ad inventory is suddenly worth a far greater amount of money because it will be seen by users that are most likely to engage with it. But it's good for the end user as well because they don't get, shown or, and in some cases bombarded with advertisements that mean nothing to them and hold no interest points to them. It's only the stuff that matters to them, which is the stuff they see, and, better for them, better for us.
Okay, and Neil, what impact do you think dynamic ad insertion and more addressability will have in terms of advertising prospects for content owners? We've heard some big claims about inventory rates, the CPMs that you can charge for targeted advertising. Do you think it's going to have a major effect on improving monetization for ad-supported content?
Yeah, I think it's certainly gaining momentum, and we all know that dynamic ad insertion has really had some real technological challenges. But it's really coming into its own, and there's already many pioneers out there. But you're right, there's lots of expectations, and the real challenge is to be able to do DAI across kind of multiple platforms. But DAI is really allowing content owners and service providers to take advantage of the kind of changing consumer lifestyle that we've all talked about on this call, about how we consume video. And traditionally, as we all know, adverts have been inserted in programs in advance, and they can't be changed once they're loaded on a TV program on the broadcaster's network. Now, digital, of course, or digital first, changes all that. DIA, it completely changes that, and the inspiration and mechanisms behind it are really aimed to refresh, stale adverts within catch-up TV or VOD content or episodic TV, and its flexibility means that target advertisers can be inserted in and out of the video content as it's delivered into the viewer, no matter what platform they're on. And so it doesn't just ensure that the ad remains fresh, but the whole personalized experience remains fresh. And there's more significance than ever before, given that this can now be effectively measured and monetized more effectively. So as Miles already said, that people are more open to advertising if it's tailored to them. If it's old, stale advertising, then they're likely to switch off. So dynamic ad insertion enables to kind of refresh that. And I guess the ideal DAI offering would span, not only linear, but VOD and TV everywhere as well. And there's some technology challenges in that, but actually to deliver it, it's more around what David mentioned earlier, which is getting a more collaborative approach between the content owners, advertisers, and service providers. But the commercial benefits are really becoming quite abundant, and adverts remain timely and relevant and are more likely to engage viewers, which leads to more purchases and more engagement and consumption if they're fresh.
Okay, well, David Mercer, talking about how the users respond to targeting, if they're more relevant, do you think there will be an increased willingness to engage?
I think so. When it's put as simply as that. Clearly we're seeing, generational shifts in attitudes here. Things are changing quickly. Internet advertising is maybe 15 years old. The millennial generation has grown up. At least in some parts of the world, it seems, accepting that their data is there to be used by by anybody with fairly informal agreement. I would again caution the different attitudes around the world, and I think we should all tread a little bit carefully, because there's always a danger of a backlash. We're always hearing stories about issues around data security and the challenges that Facebook and Google and the other guys have. So tread carefully, but I think in general, yes, there's no doubt that if you make your content relevant and personalised to the individual in general, assuming that everything is above board, you're going to have a more satisfied customer.
Okay, and in 20 seconds, do you think that people will treat that as a trade-off? They'll exchange personal data if they could get more targeting and therefore more relevant ads, or maybe even if they can get less ads overall because you can make more money from targeted ads?
Well, I think that's right. Yes, the answer is yes. Some will. And again, my first point about segmentation, there are always different approaches, different user groups out there. But yes, in general, I would say there is an increasing tendency towards that type of attitude.
Okay, all right. Well, sadly, we're out of time, so we'll have to wrap it up there. So I want to thank all our speakers today, and obviously thank everybody who was listening in. So just as a recap, it was David Amodio at Channel 4, Miles Weaver and Neil Berry from Piksel, and David Mercer at Strategy Analytics. Thanks to all of you gentlemen, and thanks to everybody who listened. And if you want to hear this on demand, you can catch that via the Videonet webcast part of our website from tomorrow onwards. Okay, thank you very much, and good afternoon.